All right, we're gonna go ahead and get going here. Welcome everyone. Today we're gonna talk about our company's failure at trying to get a competitive fighting game publishing label going. Just from the premise there, I'm sure you already know some answers yourself, but let's get going. If you're not familiar with myself or Iron Galaxy, I started Iron Galaxy in 2008. I was at Midway as a studio tech director before that. We ended up falling kind of backwards into doing a bunch of fighting games. We started off doing a lot of just like tech outsourcing, that sort of stuff. And then we kind of worked with Capcom on 3 really kind of well-received ports of classics like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike Online Edition, Darkstalkers Resurrection, Marvel vs. Capcom Origins, and then kind of parlayed that reputation from doing those kind of cool ports into years later taking over Killer Instinct from Double Helix. When Amazon bought them, we did Killer Instinct Seasons 2 and 3. And that's relevant for this talk because a lot of what we think about when we're getting this like publishing label started is like, who is our audience, who knows us? If you know Iron Galaxy, it's probably from the fighting game stuff we've done. They're probably fans of ours, right? Also, hate Windjammers a ton. Thanks, Pat. Another thing you might know us from is Divekick. If you're not familiar with Divekick, it's the first thing we ever self-published, and it's kind of the foundation for all the stuff we tried later. Divekick's a really weird story the way it happened. One of my designers, Adam Hart, was working on some of the Capcom stuff, and he came to me and said, hey, I got a little thing I'm working on the side with some friends. It's, I want to run it by you though, because it might be considered competing with the stuff we're working on here. I'm like, okay, let's hear, what is it? He's like, well, it's a game, it's a 2-button fighting game. I'm like, 2 buttons? It's like, yeah, there's like literally not even like stick movement. It's just 2 buttons. 1 button jumps in the air. The other button does a dive kick. I'm like, okay. He's like, there's 2 characters. They're called Dive and Kick. I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, every character has 1,000 health. Every dive kick does 1,000,000 damage. I'm like, okay. He's like, and it's called Dive Kick. I'm like, that's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. Go make it, yeah, good luck, Godspeed. And I laughed at him behind his back until I played it. And then I played Divekick and I instantly fell in love with it. Like I kind of talked about like falling ass backwards and doing a bunch of fighting game stuff, but I've always loved fighting games. And fighting games are, at their core, they're about a couple things, and the spacing, right? Like knowing how far you are from your opponents, getting yourself a good position where they're in more danger than you are. They're about mind games and reading your opponents, being able to predict what your opponent's gonna do and punish them when you predict them correctly. And Divekick has all of that, right? And it also doesn't have like the, hey, I gotta make a Z with the stick and hit 3 buttons exactly the same frame to do a Shiroken or whatever. It's like, it takes all the complexity out of fighting games, but it still keeps the essence of what's great about them. And so it's like a no-brainer, we should do this at IG. People know us from fighting game stuff. So we bought it off of Adam and his team and brought it in-house. And we worked on it for about a year, kind of taking it from that initial prototype to getting it out. We put it out on PS3, Vita, and Steam. It ended up being a pretty big game. Like one of the things I was really worried about with Divekick was the value proposition, because like if you look at Divekick, it looks mental, right? It's like there's nothing there, and I think it would be really hard to convince people how to play it and what it was about and all this. So we want to make sure it was loaded up with stuff. So we had 13 characters in there, a bunch of backgrounds, really robust online offerings, and some single player stuff. So this was the first thing we ever published. We had to do everything ourselves. You know, we've worked on a bunch of games like Microsoft, 2K, WB, whatever, ZeniMax. But this is the first thing, soup to nuts, we were responsible for. But I've been in a few meetings, how hard could it be, right? So first thing you do, obviously, is identify your market. I read that somewhere. And we decided to target, thank you. We decided to target the FGC. We knew that audience the best. You know, like I said before, if you're in the FGC, you've probably heard of Iron Galaxy, good, bad, or indifferent. So we wanted to pick that as like, okay, that's our core. One of the challenges of showing off Divekick is, like I said, it's really, you look at it and someone explains it to you, it sounds ridiculous. The only way to get people to like it and see what we saw in it was to take it like to all these shows. And we targeted a bunch of FGC shows. We went to Southern California regionals, Northern California regionals. We went to CEO. We went to UFGT, which is now Combo Breaker in Chicago. We went to EVO. At EVO, we ran a 350-person side tournament before the game ever launched, which is insane. We streamed the whole thing. It was really, really cool. And sure enough, when we took it places, people loved it. Like, it wasn't they liked it, they loved it. I remember the first time we showed it anywhere was PAX East in 2013. Adam showed it at his show, but it was just like prototype. This is the first time we showed the full game, and we'd never done a booth before. We had to figure out how all this stuff works, and we're spending all this money and doing all this stuff, and I was just afraid like tumbleweeds would be blowing through the booth. But by like halfway through the first day, people were lined up 6, 7 deep, right? And Divekick was the talk of PAX East. Like, it's not hyperbole. Like, you couldn't go anywhere without people like, hey, have you seen this Divekick thing? It was all like really, really well, and it was all really, really easy. And I'm becoming more and more convinced this publishing stuff is super easy. So then the game comes out. It did about 200,000 units across all platforms. We eventually also put it out on PS4 and Xbox One. The game did awful on those platforms. That's more an issue of timing. It was way too late to put a sequel out, or to put another port of it out. And I think people had enough Divekick in their lives at that point, right? Most of the original launch ended up coming from Steam, which really surprised us. Because we're targeting FGC, we're targeting fighting game players. And if you go to these tournaments we went to, they're playing on PS3, they're playing on Xbox 360. They're not playing, like the weird MAME and bloody Melty Blood kids are playing on PC. Sorry, Melty Blood fans. But no one's doing it, no one's playing it, right? And so when people are buying Steam, we kind of realized we actually targeted the wrong audience. We should have targeted the people that buy an indie game a month, or they buy a coach co-op game for their friend. So this was like the first like sign that like, okay, we kind of, Divekick seemed to do okay. It could have been a lot better. And thinking about it more deeply, I'm talking about Divekick a lot because it's the kind of the foundation for everything going forward we did. And you can't understand why we failed with the next rev of games without understanding what Divekick did. So most people, I think they'd be like, hey, 200,000 units, that's amazing, right? Well, we actually lost a little bit of money with Divekick, not a ton, but some money. But we had great platform support. Sony was an amazing partner for us. They gave us some pub funding from the pub fund thing so we could do the Vita version, which is also the best version of Divekick, if you're into that. They took us to E3 and they gave us an hour stream where they set up a press versus press tournament. They had Dr. Scholes, one of the characters from the game. They had cosplay they paid someone to come in and do. Like, Sony was an amazing partner for Divekick in a lot of ways. Like, great reaction at live events. Like, everywhere we brought it, it killed. It just destroyed, right? Good press and enthusiast following. Like, it was really weird. Like, whenever we talked about Divekick, people would write articles about it. Like, if I wanted to tell this story of how Adam tricked me into buying Divekick, like, people would write about it every time. We put a trailer out, they'd post on their website. It'd go on Polygon, it would go on Giant Bomb, it would go on IGN. And we didn't even have to email them. They just would see the trailer and put it up, right? Again, it's all super, super easy. But how do we end up losing money given that? Clearly, we shipped too much of a game. Like, I think, I don't know how many of you are split like indie dev or like big studios like ours. Like, we have 120 people at Iron Galaxy, right? And one of the jokes I like to make is like, someone can't like drop a pencil and pick it up without costing me $10,000, right? Just like nothing is cheap at Iron Galaxy. Everything's expensive and it's a huge pain in my ass. And when you work on a game like this for a year, it adds up. So it's pretty clearly one of the core things I believe about Divekick. We could have done a lot better. Even if we ended up being the exact same game, the exact same marketing plan, if we would have launched with 8 instead of 13 and then put 5 characters out over the next 6 months after launch, we would have had a longer sales window. It would have been longer and better. We would have made a lot more money just from that one tweak alone. And plus, if the game didn't sell, then we just could have stopped working on it and saved more money, right? We marketed the wrong group. Like, if we took the money going to Northern California regionals, EVO, CEO, and put it towards going to stuff like, Comic-Con or an anime show or whatever, we would have reached the audience that actually ended up buying the game, and I'm sure we would have sold more units just doing that, spending the exact same amount we did in a smarter way. And then we squandered the goodwill with the press. Like, what I know now about publishing and like best practices and handling PR launches and marketing and all this stuff, like the stuff we did right and a better job at with all these next round of titles, if we would have done best practices with Divekick, we would have sold a million units. Like, I firmly believe that. Like, the problem with Divekick is everything was too easy and we didn't have to work at it, so we just thought everything would just kind of work out. That being said, business is always full of failures, and you're gonna fail a lot when you're running a business. It's about what did you take away from that experience, and what can you package up going forward to reuse on an ongoing basis. So we now have publishing experience. We know what it's like to submit to the ESRB. We know what it's like to hire an external QA team to check for bugs for you. We know what it's like to deal with Microsoft and Sony and all the weird quirks they have about publishing on their platforms, right? We know what it's like to deal with like the vacuum of information that can be Steam sometimes, right? And that's super, super valuable stuff. We have a built-in audience now. 200,000 people bought Divekick or got tricked into buying it, whatever it is, and they love it. And they still, like there's message boards that talk about Divekick, the Divekick website, all this stuff. So they're Iron Galaxy fans for life, which is super awesome because it's something we never had before. A lot of the work we did before it's behind the scenes stuff. Like we help a developer or a publisher ship their game on time. We do a version of a version of a version of a game. And it's not super glamorous and it's behind the scenes, but this is the first time it's like, oh fuck, I love Iron Galaxy, this is great. So we had that. Better understanding of the market and who we have to sell to. Talked about this a lot. One thing I didn't talk about though is with the FGC stuff is like, we really, when I say we target the FGC, it just wasn't by spending on events. We really leaned into like trying to get credibility with them in a way that was kind of dumb. Because it's like, you know, the FGC, they got a reputation. Like I love that community and it's filled with loving like people that build things, like build groups and friends. But it's got a reputation for being like really rough around the edges, and it's earned that reputation by and large fairly, right? And so our marketing was like that. When we talk about the game on streams, we talked about it like that. And I'm sure it was off-putting to people that weren't part of that community, right? We found our voice, right? Divekick was the first thing we ever did. We got to do the trailers like we wanted. We did weird, funny, like infomercial style trailers. We got to do whatever we wanted, and it was fun. Yeah, so we want to take those assets and flip it into a new publishing business, right? And the core premise for the business is, okay, what did we do wrong on Divekick? Above and beyond like everything else, we probably just spent too much making Divekick. So how do we get around that with other things? We don't have anything internal we're working on right now that kind of fits the bill. So let's focus on like finding other people's games that are competitive, right? Because like, again, if you think about who we are as a studio, our fans play competitive games. They play fighting games, we know that. Let's not try to sell adventure games. Let's not try to sell first-person shooters, because no one that knows us knows like anything about us in that context, right? So let's focus on competitive games, find ones that are near completion, and do micro investments essentially in games that are near completion, and be an amplification for whatever marketing or stuff they want to do. Sorry, just pointing at Tim Rogers. Love Tim. And the execution on that, we had just a hand set of core rules for games we were going to sign, right? Again, find things that you think you can recoup on the first day, right? If you think about like, okay, games that's close to done with micro investments, say we make a $25,000 investment in a title, right? Say we price it at $15. If we have to sell 3,000 copies across 3 platforms on the first day to recoup. After Divekick, I didn't think there was any way in the world we couldn't do that. Right? Divekick taught me like, no, if we just do our things and you know, publish the games like we did Divekick, there's no way we do that. It's fall over easy. It's like impossible to screw that up. We wanted to offer developers things other publishers couldn't, because we're a developer first and foremost who happens to publish, right? And we could help them like figure out how to get through QA, work on stuff like UI or whatever it is, right? So we also didn't want to do one title. We wanted to build 3, and we always want to present them together. The thinking being, I think this is actually one thing we did that was pretty smart. So you never show just one game in isolation, right? You show all 3 are together at all times, so they're associated together in people's minds. Like, they don't see like the Gunsport trailer, they see the Video Ball, Capsule Force, and Gunsport trailer. So if they buy Capsule Force and they like it, or they bought Divekick and they liked it, they're aware of the other 3 things they can do, and it kind of just use them to amplify each other. And then just do the same marketing and PR stuff we did for Divekick, take it on the road a lot, show it to people why it's great, do streams, do all this stuff, and then obviously cash large checks. This is, if you take away one thing from today's talk, make it Mefford's law, first law of game development. Nate Mefford, I started working with in 2005. He's a programmer. He's without a doubt one of the smartest people I've ever met. And Mefford's first law of game development is the worst thing that can happen to a young developer is to work on a successful game because you end up thinking you had something to do with it being successful. I just soak it up. And this was Divekick for us, right? Like Divekick, everything was easy. Whenever we wanted to talk about Divekick, people would write about it. People picked up the trailers. They wanted to talk about Divekick. There was an enthusiasm about Divekick, and we thought it was us. We didn't think, it's not this game that's amazing, right? It's us and this mechanism we're building around it that makes people so interested in it, right? And once you lost focus on that, it kind of it makes you realize that every mistake you made was avoidable. And let's talk about those now. So we've got this new, by the way, I didn't realize Mefford's first law of game development applied until I was writing this deck. So recent finding for your boy. I gotta stop doing that. We signed 3 games. First one we signed was Capsule Force. It's kind of like got a Nidhogg screen push mechanic to it. It's got 80s Japanese anime kind of aesthetic to it. It's really cool, I love it. Gunsport we signed, that's the first one's by Cloudbit, Eric and Kat. Second one was Gunsport. It's Necrosoft with Brandon Sheffield and his crew. And I freaking love Gunsport, right? Like, it's basically volleyball with guns, right? And so instead of like bumping and setting like lamos, you're shooting a ball across the net with a gun. It's like totally cool. Video ball, I fell in love with. Video ball is an electronic sport, right? The way to describe it to people if you've never seen it, like the shorthand that doesn't do it justice is it's like asteroids meets soccer, right? So signed those all at once, and then we launched the label. I'm trying to get the volume here right. So again, we're gonna talk about all these things at once, and this trailer is kind of the first time we should have realized something we were doing was wrong. Because when we put out trailers for Divekick, like I said, they get picked up, they'd end up on every single website. We wouldn't have to tell them that they were out, right? We put this trailer together. Tim's friend Vito did this. It's really good. It's funny in the way we like to be funny. It kind of doesn't take itself too seriously in a way we like to treat ourselves. And it shows off all the games, I think in a flattering way. And no one watched this trailer, right? Like if you look at the views of it by YouTube, it's super, super low. And we were used to getting like 50 to 100,000 views in a week on Divekick stuff, right? So this is Video Ball. And I knew each game from a different way. I met Capsule Force, I got introduced to from the Devolver crew. Gunsport, I think I saw Brandon playing it somewhere. Or no, I heard Chris Charla talking about Gunsport, and I had to check it out. And Tim, when we were showing off Divekick, Tim was showing off Video Ball with his publisher for the game at the time. It was Midnight City, and their booth was always by our booth. And so I got to know Tim and hang out with him and play a bunch of Video Ball, and I love Video Ball. So to be clear, I think all 3 of those games are super brilliant in their own way, and that's why we decided to publish them. Okay, this makes a lot of sense. But again, like showing them all together like this. We did all this and no one bought the games, right? We went to shows, we went to PAXs. We did an amazing booth at this last PAX East. We had 1 billion people come through and play these games, but sales weren't there. What ended up happening, Capsule Force launched first on PS4 and Steam. Just never found an audience. We could never get excitement up for it. We do a stream for Capsule Force and 44 people would watch it. And we do streams for Divekick. Like, this is like amazing. We do like a character reveal stream for Divekick. We'd have like 1,500 to 4,000 people watching those streams. That's like more than we get for Killer Instinct streams, which is like mind-boggling. Gunsport and Video Ball both end up taking longer than we originally imagined, and we had to make some tough choices. Like, we don't have this infinite supply of money to keep dumping into this publishing venture. It was like a fixed budget thing for us. And so we just had to cut one of them so the other one could live. So we ended up cutting Gunsport. And to be clear, I can't wait to play that game when Brandon gets it done. Like, I think Gunsport's brilliant. And then we did Video Ball. Video Ball launched in this last August, I think, on PS4, Xbox One, and Steam, and it still hasn't recouped yet. So given all that, like let's think about the faulty assumptions we made and why everything broke. Obviously, there's Mefford's first law of game development, right? But like, there's more kind of specific things about that. We kind of thought that like we had an audience of fans, and it's core to who we are, and they love Killer Instinct, and they love Divekick, and they're gonna, just because we say these games are good, they're gonna buy them, right? It turns out, and this is something I figured out way too late as well, it's not that people like Divekick or Killer Instinct. People like very specific things about the games they play. Right? Like some people like the sensei quotes from Divekick. Some people like that when Mr. N runs backwards, he squeals, right? In Killer Instinct, some people like the shadow system or whatever it is, right? And if you're giving them an offering that doesn't have those very specific things in it, they won't care. They don't give a shit about it, right? So it's about really understanding the games you make and you pour your heart and soul into and you publish, what do people actually like about them? You need to have those conversations with your consumers. So if you're thinking about leveraging them later and selling more things to them down the road, you know exactly what you're selling to them, right? And you cannot get too micro with that discussion. There's no level of detail that's insignificant when you're talking about that aspect of it. So timelines and budgets of the game would be small and predictable. This is literally the dumbest thing I've ever done. So, and I've had some doozies. We're a game developer, right? And if you tell me, hey, here's an idea, we're gonna give you a short timeline and a little bit of money, or do you expect a good result? And my answer would be no fucking way do I expect a good result. These things take time, they take money, they're done when they're done, right? Everyone knows that about games. They're done when they're done, but yet somehow we wanted to find things that were on a short timeline because we think they're near the end and make micro investments in them and expected a good result, right? And that's just not how games get made. It's not reflective of how games get made. Any business model you create for funding and publishing games needs to take into account that you don't really get to say when the game's done, right? You get to say when it comes out, and it's either done or it's not, right? And that's something that is very challenging about publishing, and I don't really know, short of being absolutely cutthroat about cutting things early, I don't really know a good way to fix that other than just have bigger budgets. And then lastly, kind of talked about this one already, if we just spent more time going to Comic-Con, spent more time going to whatever, all the other kind of core shows, we would have done a lot better not reaching out to the FGC directly. That's more specifically for Divekick. So kind of wrapping up here, there's 2 slides of learnings. I talked this first one already. People very specific things about the games they play. It's interesting, think about it like this, what is on your game bookshelf that you play, right? And if you think about what you like about all the games on your bookshelf, you'll notice trends, you'll notice things like that. And it's really easy to look at Steam and figure out what games people are playing and figure out, should I even bother trying to market it to this group or this group? Find people that like this game. Does that make sense to try to market to people that like Samurai Gun or whatever it is, right? That's really easy to do with Steam and Steam Spy. Make a minimum viable product. This really, you can only do this if the game allows it. But like I said with Divekick, if we would have launched with 8 characters and put the other 5 out over the following 6 months, our sales curve would have been longer, we would have made a lot more money, we would have had higher engagement, and all those things are really good for commercializing these things as products, right? Have a plan to extend the game if it finds an audience. This one is, this is about finding a balance, right? Because plans are cheap and building things are expensive, right? But if you don't have enough stuff, people will never buy it because the value proposition's off. And you factor into the MVP discussion, how do you do it? So these 2 things are kind of very coupled together in my mind. You can only ship an MVP if you have plans you can easily execute on to make more stuff later, right? And follow up with it if it finds an audience, right? And then finally, hype just can't be created. This is again, this is us thinking, oh, we made the hype for Divekick, not Divekick made the hype for Divekick. And it's an easy mistake to fall into with success, to think oh yeah, this was good because of us. And it's really, no, it's the game. It's always the game. Yeah, so whatever your original business plan is, it would have been really easy to keep pouring money into Gunsport, to keep pouring money into Capsule Force, to keep pouring money into Video Ball. But we wouldn't have, I don't think we would have gotten a better result. Video Ball, Gunsport, Capsule Force, the market is so much more competitive now than when it was when we launched Divekick in 2013, right? And I don't think you can do small scale publishing on the budgets we were talking about in this day and age. I just don't think it works, right? And so pouring more money still would have been just a little bit of money in the grand scheme of things. These aren't $2 million video games, right? So I think one of the things we did right from an Iron Galaxy perspective, it was very painful to have that conversation with Brandon and explain to him that we're walking away from Gunsport and he can have it back. But from Iron Galaxy's perspective, it was absolutely the very right thing to do because it wasn't gonna end well. Video Ball wouldn't have ended as well. And we had to kind of pick our battles there. This is a good one. I think this is, if if you're doing streams and getting 44 viewers, if you're going to shows and not getting a buzz, if you're doing trailers and they get 10 views on YouTube the first day, you need to think about what the fuck you're doing because you're doing something wrong, right? Either something's wrong with the game, something is wrong with your approach, something is wrong with your outreach. You're doing something wrong and you need to reevaluate even doing it at all, right? Good job, that's me. Don't artificially limit your potential audience. This is a mistake we made on Divekick. I kind of already talked about it. We just leaned so hard into FGC stuff and had kind of a rough edge around everything we did with Divekick. I'm sure it turned away potential consumers. In fact, consumers that were the people that ended up buying the game. Finally, if you're working as a publisher, you have external dev teams, probably. Don't assume anything about the external dev teams. Like one of the bigger mistakes we made was, okay, we shipped, I think Iron Galaxy at this point has shipped helped shipped over 100 products in 8.5 years. Like no one's done that, right? And you get really good by shipping things. And these teams we work with are all very capable teams, but they just don't have that much experience, right? And so we did not ask, we asked them questions we would ask ourselves. We didn't ask them questions that you should have been asking us 8.5 years ago, right? And so I think we should have been more proactive about a lot of things. I think we should have been more involved. They all would have hated every second of it, right? But I'm sure it would have been better if we were more involved in every kind of, even creative decisions and just talking stuff out. So remember Mefford's first law of game development. Any questions? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Hey man, good talk. I was kind of hoping to hear more about your conference strategy. Was that purely for player acquisition, or were you doing other stuff? And when you talk about big shows like Comic-Con being a smaller company, do you ever fear about getting drowned out next to the Avengers or something?
Yeah. So the question was, he wants to know what's our show strategy? What do we try to get out of showing at things like PAX? And are bigger shows worth it for a smaller team? Yeah, it's strictly about acquisition and user engagement. You can try to set press stuff up at shows, but they never come. It's really challenging. The other thing that's really great about shows is as a developer, you build up a network of other developers that are your size and have your same problems. And that's it's valuable on a different axis than getting fans of your company in your game. Getting drowned out at Comic-Con is absolutely a big thing, but you just don't spend $1 million going to Comic-Con. Find a place where you can sit at a corner of a table with somebody or whatever. Spend proportionally on what results you expect. Yeah, simply put. So, cool.
You were talking about how you had a 120-person dev team.
Yeah.
And you were talking about you're publishing these 3 other games. What were you working on in between while you were publishing these games?
So the publishing team was very small. It was me, it was a guy named Eddie Caparaz, and Felix. That was essentially the publishing team and QA. Chelsea, who's my business partner, runs all the other games. We've done, the big stuff we were working on that time was Killer Instinct. That's like a 75-person team. We did Elder Scrolls Online, the console versions of that. That was like a 35 peak team. Just tons of stuff, and the teams get smaller. We have some projects that are like 1 or 2 people. We're doing the 4K up-res for a game I can't talk about, unfortunately. Stuff like that. So lots and lots of different kinds of projects. Some creative, some ports, and some are just working behind the scenes to get stuff shipped.
And do you think, that publishing part that you said, you end up being unsuccessful, do you think it impacted, budget-wise, a lot of your other titles?
No, so I'm guessing I don't have to repeat these because he's on a microphone, but just in case, did this publishing failure cost us other opportunities? And this was money we set aside to set up a new business venture. It was very budgeted, it was very measured, which is why we just couldn't keep dumping money into the games, right? So no, it didn't really have any impact. It just meant instead of starting our own indie game, start setting the next Divekick, we invested in these other external titles, right? That's what it disallowed. That's the opportunity it took away.
All right, thank you.
No problem. I think we've got time for one more, maybe? We good? All right, thanks everybody.